Hi, everybody. So nice to have you here. Thank you on behalf of the Scarsdale Library. Madeleine Henry, thank you so much for coming here to talk with us about your book, The Love Proof.
My pleasure. So happy to be here.
I have so many questions and so many things that I'm wondering about. And
I have all the answers.
well, you're the person behind it. So so I'm so grateful to have you here. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself at all or if you want me to just dive right in, but
I'm happy to give some context for
sure.
people just tuning in. So, this is my second book, The Love Proof. It came out in February of 2021. The paperback came out last month. My first novel was called Breathe In, Cash Out, and that was a completely different book. It came out in 2019, and it was a comedy about a investment banker who wants to become a yogi. And so this is a really different change of pace for me as a writer. And then previously, I worked in finance before taking the giant leap to writing. And then before that, I went to Yale. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming
Great. Thank you. Um, so it sounds like your two books are very different.
They are.
And um, science seems to be such a big shift from finance and yoga.
Yes.
So it seems like you have a lot of different interests, and I'm so interested in knowing more about that. Where did the science come from? Because I think I mean, I don't know. I never took physics because these sort of big intangible ideas to me are always so incomprehensible. Do you have a background in science? Is this something that you were just interested in? Where? Like, it makes my head spin. So
Where, how, why?
yeah, all of the things.
Right. So I've actually weirdly always really loved the sciences because that was where my curiosity led me. I found that when I was curious about what is this world, what are we made of, what are we doing, science had a lot of those answers. And so a lot of the material for Sophie came from my own life, came from my own curiosity, trying to figure out why we're here. And then I did take physics while I was at Yale. I did consider being a physics major. I loved reading Michio Kaku and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And so I had a very natural interest that opened up all these topics for me to explore later in the book. And then when I was writing, though, I did do a lot of research as I was going. And so I don't have a master's degree, I don't have a graduate degree in physics, but I was really empowered to teach myself everything that I needed to learn to write the love story that I wanted to write.
That's so interesting. Again, head spinning. Was it, so it was all sort of self-directed, it was all just based out of your own interests?
Absolutely. And then learning as I went while writing this book, I was really empowered by something Elon Musk said. He was asked in an interview, how did you learn so much about rockets? And he said, I read books. And so here's one of the most knowledgeable people about space, about rockets, and he taught himself so much of what he knows. And that to me was a really empowering moment. And so in writing my own book, I used a lot of publicly available information in public studies and journals. So I just really learned myself.
Well, it seems like that's such an interesting, I mean, it's what Sophie does too.
Yeah.
It seems like she is such an autodidact, and she's her mother's trying to get her to go outside and she's reading about, who's it, Phineas Gage?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
she's really trying to absorb
Yeah.
as much as she can,
Yeah,
just from
absolutely.
reading and from going to the library and from getting her hands on everything.
Yeah, I actually feel like the desire to teach yourself and to learn on your own, it's an extension of the creative spirit because creation is all about self-direction to make something no one has asked for. No one has ever asked for this. And nobody asked for the love proof and gave any premise, and it all just came of my own self-direction. And so wanting to learn and teach myself, it seems like it's an avenue that runs closely to creative spirit.
That's really interesting. And I think so much of what comes up in this book is about that connection with wanting to know, and that curiosity, and that attempt to prove or discover something in the world. But I think it's so interesting to relate things like physics to love.
Yeah.
I mean, I think physics deals so much in those intangibles, which is maybe why I struggle with it so much. But where did that sort of concrete desire to prove love come from? Because that it's an unusual dichotomy.
Yeah, it is. So there is there are some experiences that I've had that led to me thinking of this story. And one of them was growing up in a very hyper intellectual space. So I went to a boarding school called Exeter, and then I went to Yale, and then I worked at Goldman Sachs. And these were all hyper intellectual places. And there was a period in my life, then I moved into finance, and then I started to get into yoga. And that was a big turning point in my life, because I found in yoga, and this was just on the side while I was in finance, I found in yoga some messages that I'd never heard before. And they were to slow down, and they were to do less, and they were to not think and to feel more. And those were messages I'd never heard in a really hyper intellectual atmosphere. And I found them to be really nurturing to me personally. And so I started doing yoga every day while I was working in finance. And I really took a lot of the lessons there very seriously, and I internalized them. And so a lot of what Sophie is wrestling with is actually that same intellectual dilemma I had, which is everyone is telling me truth is important, or that it was, and then she actually is choosing to listen to her own heart and her own feelings and this whole other her gut, and it's just a whole other compass to live by. And so my experiences and that battle that I had, which led to me choosing to follow my gut and go into writing fiction, and that's similar to Sophie's battle, which is everyone is telling me to be the mathematical prodigy I was meant to be, but I feel something, and I want to follow it and see where it goes. So that's where I got the idea.
Interesting. I imagine that being told to slow down when you're working in the world of finance is something that's very welcome.
Yeah, exactly. No one's ever rewarding you for doing less for longer, in the financial world.
Yeah, I can imagine. I found Sophie to be an interesting character that, in many ways, she comes across as very childish in lots of ways. She's very introverted. She's very, I don't know that I would say unsure of herself, because I don't think that's the right word, but she's very withdrawn.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interesting thing when somebody that is that withdrawn and that maybe not as connected to those around her is put in the spotlight.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I felt for her in those moments. You had said something about her being on Good Morning America, and I could just picture this little girl being like, okay, here I am.
Yeah.
And I imagine, I think about what it's like to go to school for the first time and have to meet people and sort of reinvent yourself. But if you are coming in as a prodigy, there are all these expectations that are placed on you before you even arrive.
Yeah.
I thought a lot about the pressure of being a prodigy.
Yeah, it takes the dilemma that I was describing for my own life, and it takes it to a whole other level just to communicate the idea a little bit more effectively. And I always had a very clear idea for this story. I remember when I sold my first book, and I was in the publisher's office, and I was sitting with the team, and people always want to know what's next, you know. And so I remember I was asked, "What's next?" And I said, "I want to write a story that proves true love." And at the time, they had just bought the most sarcastic and sassy, fast paced Wall Street book. And I must have looked insane. But I think that a funny thing about creativity is you can't really control it if you're going to be really honest. So that's why I ended up going in a very different direction, because I told a story that was very authentic, something I really believed in. And
Mhm.
and I did it even when they thought I might not. But you mentioned that Sophie is very childlike, and that was very intentional. And it actually dates back to a course that I took at Yale, which was called Unpacking the Nature of Genius. And so that was a very interesting course, which took a group of individuals, which are commonly thought to be geniuses, and it looked for common traits among them. And
Mhm.
this was actually taught by a professor who is associated with the music school. So I'm not sure what the connection is, except that a lot of the geniuses were musicians. So he focused on Mozart and Bach. And so he had roots there. But one of the traits in common was a childlike sensibility. And that really stuck with me, because in looking at all of these geniuses in class, I saw how juvenile they were in really significant ways. So Mozart would play these really childish jokes on people, and Albert Einstein, we know for the iconic tongue picture, his playful curiosity about the universe. And that stuck with me. And so when I was writing Genius Sophie, I really wanted to emphasize her childlike characteristics, because also her life choice to pursue this one feeling and hold on to it for a decade is very childlike, very unusual. It's not mature to hold on to an old love. And there's something that is both admirable and not admirable about it. And so I thought that her being very childlike was very important.
Mm. It's interesting that you say that, and that so much of it was about music, because I think that is a pretty common story with these
Yeah,
like child prodigies being sort of forced into the spotlight, or just have these sort of outsized talents, and then suddenly you're a kid in the adult world.
yeah,
Was
absolutely.
was Sophie of college age? I don't know if I picked up on that
Great
entirely.
point. She was. But great point. It could have definitely been written where she skipped grades. That actually, if there's ever if this is adapted, maybe that should be the Sophie's News character. She should be skipping grades. Make more sense.
Well, I remember you had mentioned something about there being discussion about it, but I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if that had happened or not.
Right. No, her mother found it to be very important for Sophie to stay with her peers, because she wanted her emotional development to be emphasized over her intellect.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned her, hanging on to this love for all of this
Yeah.
time, maybe against her better judgment, or maybe not. But I found that as something that was a little bit um sad or frustrating.
Mm, yeah.
As a reader, I wanted to see her find this sort of happiness. And do you think
Yeah.
she found it
Mm.
until she found it? Um,
I think that she did. And we're doing spoilers, I
right,
think.
we can, yeah, if you're okay with that, we can
I'm
talk,
fine.
we can
I'm
talk
fine. I
spoilers.
know what
I
happens.
think since this is set up as a book discussion, I'm assuming
Yeah,
that everybody's read the book. So I hope
that makes sense.
that's the case.
Yeah, so I think that after she did prove block theory, she did find a more balanced life before meeting Jake.
Yeah.
She lived to her social potential.
Okay.
So I think she did, but it was obviously a whole other level when she was able to be with the one that she loved. So,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I think that in the moment when you feel achy, like Sophie felt achy, when you feel loss and grief, it feels like a decade. You know,
Oh,
it's
I
the
can tell you that.
emotional, it's the emotional truth is that it feels like a decade. And in this book, that is just actually the events. So it's emotionally true, even though it's
Yeah.
unrealistic. So
Okay, so that's a really interesting connection that goes back to all of the discussion about time
yeah,
and how people perceive time and how animals perceive time and um how time is so dependent on circumstance and all of that. So that's a really interesting
yeah.
insight on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the starter ideas as well, is thinking about time and relationships. And I found it very interesting that the amount of time a relationship has gone on does not correlate with how deeply that person is in your heart. You can
Mhm.
just meet someone and feel a very deep connection that could change the course of your life. And alternatively, you can know someone for your whole life and maybe they haven't really entered your heart and won't affect you in a profound way. And so what is it about deep connections and time that's different? And so I started thinking about how love and time might be related and how time might change when we're in love. And so those were kind of the intellectual questions that I'm playing with in the book through Sophie, because time certainly feels different when you're in love.
Sure.
So
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's that is an interesting thing because I think so many relationships are like, oh, well, we've been together for however many years, but we're not actually happy, but we're going to
yeah,
stay there because of all of this time that we've put into it. So it's interesting to see the sort of inverse of that um,
yeah,
get played
absolutely.
out.
Right. And then in the actual structure of the book, I'm also thinking about time because it is structured unusually. Like it doesn't go from beginning to end in a linear way. It cuts back to their childhoods and then it jumps forward into the future. And so I thought it was an interesting way to manifest block theory, which is the theory that the past, present, and future are all existing at once if the actual chronology of the story is jumbled and everything is happening at once. So that, within the block of a book.
Again, see, here's where my head starts
Yeah,
spinning. But
exactly.
yeah,
Well,
but
when you
but
work
it's a,
alone for a year on something, you get into some pretty crazy
oh, I
ideas.
gotcha.
It happens.
but
No
it
one's
but
there
it's
to say, hey, back
it's
down.
such an interesting concept. And
Yeah,
it's like, and again, the it's it's an interesting thing. But like
right.
I like how you brought their childhoods into it because they both had very different childhoods
Yeah.
and very different families. And I think about Sophie's relationship to her mother and how supportive she was
Yeah.
versus Jake's relationship with his mother and his father and all of that, and how Jake's mother seemed to put things into a tailspin with a single word.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think that says about Jake's character? Because he seemed to really know exactly what he wanted from the very beginning. He was going to achieve that,
Mhm.
you know, regardless of outside circumstances. And
Yeah.
he did.
Yeah.
Um, whereas, and I think the views of both of their goals are so interesting because I think they really just did one of these
Yeah.
where, Sophie had this talent and this sort of hunger for knowledge, and Jake had this drive to succeed.
Right.
And it seemed like that was really the moment where they stopped seeing each other, you know,
Yeah.
in some ways.
Yeah.
Do you think that is all part of their upbringing? Do you think it's something innate? Do you think it's
Yeah, well, to me, what stands out about both of them is they're both very lonely. And so I see so in their childhoods, that's very evident because Sophie she's more obviously lonely than Jake because she doesn't have anyone who can really understand her. But Jake has loneliness in the sense of he feels more responsibility than anyone else his age. So as a kid, he is forced into this idea of adulthood that he wants to take care of his mother and be a responsible man very young because they did not have that in their family. And so he's lonely because of that responsibility. And then when they meet, it is the one lapse in that solitude. It's I see you and you understand me and I understand you. And that ability of finally being able to relate to someone else is very moving when you have the context of their childhoods to show the opposite. So
yeah. Okay. And
what's interesting also is you mentioned Jake's relationship with his mom. At I think it was the last event I did for the Love Proof, somebody asked, why are there no dads in this book? Which I'd never thought about. And then I was thinking about it because I didn't really like my answer. And I think because this is a book about nurturing, it's all about the nurturing mom, and it's all about following your gut and your heart, and it's all about that. And it's I feel like it's feminine energy. So my feeling.
But it's interesting that Jake's mother encouraged him to not follow his heart.
I know. That's a good point.
And that, she said, this isn't for you. And that seemed to be sort of a turning point for him.
Yeah.
Is that mom knows all, or is that?
Yeah, well, he definitely trusted her. But then eventually he came around to trusting himself.
Yeah. It's so funny because so Jake is very, we haven't really talked about him too much yet.
Right.
He seems to be at least physically described as very much the opposite of Sophie, where she's childlike and she's feminine and she's slight. He's muscular and manly and tall and self-assured and all of that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that contrast is very intentional. But
yeah.
What informed his character for you?
Well, I think that they are both solitude. They both have solitude in their youth, but they also have high ambition in their youth. And so I wanted them to have similar paths before they met, in a way that they could relate to each other and have that deep connection, have that I understand all sides of you, build up to that and give it legs. And so I wanted them both to be ambitious, but in different ways. And so Jake was born of this idea of who is someone Sophie would really fall for. And it would be a very ambitious person. It would be a very strong person, because she is both of those things. And so it was really in crafting Sophie's opposite that I started to think about him, and his intensity and his determination. Those are important qualities.
Okay. I think about, again, we're going into spoilers.
Right.
I think about the breakup.
Yes.
I have really complex feelings about that whole situation.
Fabulous.
Because I think, he was breaking up with her in interest of forcing her to pursue her dreams.
Yes.
But was it also maybe in pursuit of his own? And I struggled with it because I feel like, I don't know, if somebody broke up with me like that, I would be furious.
Yeah, of course.
And it just didn't seem like she had any agency in that situation. It was well, I'm going to make a decision about how things are going to be going forward. And I don't know, I'm not Sophie.
Right. Yeah.
But if I were in that position, I would be really mad about it
Yeah. I
because it's
think
like,
that
I'm not part of this decision.
that situation can only really unfold with her. It's not a mature conversation for two adults are working things out in a mature, balanced relationship. It's a very intense, all consuming, young relationship between very young people.
Yeah.
I think that holding it to the rules of normal adult discussions, it breaks down
Yeah.
when you're looking at them. Um, so it really takes into account their unique circumstances and characteristics that would ever happen. And
Yeah.
being in his head, I like Jake. I think he's a good person and he has good intentions with that scene, even though it's hard to read it as an adult who's used to more balanced communication. But
Mm.
at that, for them, that's the best they can do. Uh, it's like, and you know what? We forget like what it's like to have an adolescent communication, adolescent mind. And this is a very youthful love. It's their first love. They're very young, even though they're very gifted. So
Right. Also that I mean, in this case, it turns out to be true, but that first love being like well, this is gonna be it forever. And
yeah, and
but
how
I
all
think
consuming it is. Yeah,
right, but I think that's what again made me kind of sad about Sophie. Like 30 years later,
yeah, I know.
I'm like,
But that's
oh
the
girl, you
emotional
gotta go
truth
live
of
your
it.
life.
I know, I
You
know.
know. Um, and I don't mean that as a criticism. It's
Right,
just
of course,
it,
yeah,
it was just I struggled with her experience of all of that
right,
because I was like, okay, well, you weren't even given a choice in this situation, and here you
right,
are this many years later. And I understand this has become the source of all of your research, and this has become your purpose in life, and this is what you're
yeah.
trying to do. But oh my God, have some fun, you know?
No. Well, it's the thing is that it is not a realistic story. It is almost like a fairy tale
Yeah.
in how singular a love can be. So
Hmm.
I think that it takes that to an extreme and there's an emotional truth to the story,
Sure.
even if it's not a realistic truth.
Sure. Well, I mean, if we're talking about sort of the future part of it,
Yeah.
I think, what do you think? I mean, I've been trying to sort of mull over Sophie's intentions with tutoring Liam.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and I think about, is it ultimately a plan to try to reconnect? Is it a desire for proximity and something that was comforting and close to her? Was it that she had this talent and he needed it? Um, you know, I think it can go in many different directions.
Yeah. I think that her intentions were not 100% selfless. She's not saying, "Oh, let me help this poor artistic soul with his
No.
physics homework." She wants the chance to be close to the person that she loved in the place that she loved him. She just
Hmm.
wants that moment. She wants to be in that tutoring room, just remembering what it was like. And so that is what she wants.
And it's interesting that Liam is sort of singularly focused too.
Yeah, he is. But he is relative to the other characters much more balanced in the fact
Yes.
that he can pursue what he loves and have love with a human being. So
Yes.
he doesn't have to choose between, his professional passion and his personal passion.
Yeah.
He achieves them both, which is hopeful to me in thinking about the ending because I think, okay, the next generation of this story is happy. Like,
Well,
like
that's nice to know.
yeah, exactly. And so I'm at a point where I commit to happy endings. Like that's just how I think about writing. I think it's really important to have things work out or be satisfying. So to me, this is a happy, satisfying ending because you have the two you have Sophie and Jake end up together, and then you have the next generation fulfilled relative to them. And then they, in my mind, go on and form their own family. He reconnects with Liam, and I think I lay the groundwork to predict that. So,
what do you think happens in their future? I
um,
mean, I wasn't planning on asking this, but now
yeah,
that we're here.
yeah, it's funny. I actually got an email 2 days ago from someone who said that they've thought about this book every day for a year. And
Oh
they
my
need to
God.
know. I know.
What a compliment.
I know. And then they said, I need to know what happens after the end. And so I said, I was like,
Wow, what an email.
yeah, I know. So I said that I think Jake and Sophie, they end up together. And then she is the catalyst for him to reconcile with Liam, because in rejecting Liam, it was really his struggle with losing Sophie. And so once he has peace with Sophie, he can reconnect with his son. So he can stop being in denial about everything that he did and their separation. So I see them reconciling and going forward.
Interesting. I like that.
It's happy.
It is happy. It is happy. So much of this book is about connection and intuition, and even connection despite 30 years of being apart.
Yeah.
And is that the romanticism in you, or is that I don't know, maybe I can be a little cynical, but I love that connection is part of this. And
Yes. I think it would be hard to write a book and be pessimistic, because you need extraordinary optimism because it's a long process with uncertain results. So I think that the idealism of their relationship maybe goes hand in hand with the crazy undertaking of fiction.
Okay, I got that. I believe that.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, I do, I look back, I continue to grow, but my books don't. And so I do look back, I'm older since I first had since the first idea for the Love Proof, which was February of 2018. I had this idea.
Okay.
And so that was a while ago. There's been a lot of emotional growth in me. And I look back and I think it's more idealistic, frankly, than I am now. And I couldn't, like, my relationships and what I explore now in my work, they're different.
Yeah. Well, what I think is so interesting, that since you put it in those terms, is that your book came out in the middle of a pandemic, and now that need for human connection is such a regular, everyday part of our discussions and of what people talk about and what they say their needs are. So
yes,
connection is so much in the forefront of what we are actively thinking about.
Yeah, it was very obviously the pandemic, coming out during the pandemic, nobody anticipated that it would be released in that time.
Of course.
But it was interesting that we were all separated. And then a book came out that talked about how you could be connected to the people you were separated from. So that was unusual. And then also the idea of time was a little bit different in quarantine, where you didn't, I don't know if you've blocked it out, but when the days couldn't be differentiated against each other because you never left, no matter what. The idea of time being different during the pandemic was relevant when a book came out talking about how time maybe isn't as linear as we think. So
that's a really
tie it to current events back then.
Oh, that's such an interesting point, because I feel like there were moments of all of that was like, oh, I can stay home forever and like I'll be okay with this. And then like a few days later, I'd be like, oh my God, I need my people. Where are my people? And
yeah.
And it would go back and forth between those two things. through all of that. So yeah, that's a really good demonstration of time. Well done, Madeleine.
Yeah, exactly.
um, do you what do you hope people take from this?
So when I started writing, I had a few things in mind, and one of them is I wanted people to deeply feel the emotion of being connected to someone who is no longer there.
Mhm.
Like I had that experience in my own life, and I just wanted it to be so rich in this book that like you cut the pages, it would just bleed. Like it would just be that emotion so saturated. And so I really wanted people to deeply feel the book. And I set people up with what I want to express in the opening quote from Victoria Erickson, talking about how deep connections last forever, which is something I do believe. So that was one intention, was what I wanted people to feel from the book. And I wanted to substantiate it with science, because then I thought that's more convincing. So not only can you have a convincing relationship that imparts that, but if you were actually to find some sort of scientific um, expression of that too, that would help express the feeling. So I discovered block theory. I mean, I didn't personally discover, but my
Well,
research,
yeah.
I came across block theory, which is the past, present, and future all existing at once. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that is the perfect expression of feeling connected to someone who's no longer there if you are still with them at this moment that you are not. And so then I knew to incorporate that into the book. And so that was my intention.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks.
And then my last question before I open it up is, what are you working on?
Okay, so I have undertaken very different projects since the Love Proof. So my latest that I just sent in, and I'm waiting to hear what the next step is it is a story about a painter who may be unstable, and that's I won't say more than that, but it's about a possibly unstable painter, and what are the illusions in her world, and what is real. And so it's an exploration of her crazy life. So, and it involves lots of complex relationships, murder, and it's a very different tone from
Sounds like
everything I've ever written. So I'm excited about that. And then I'm right now working on a mystery. This person has disappeared, and it's a missing author. So I'm more getting into murder mystery, and so that's a different genre for me. But,
okay. Are you having fun with it?
Yeah, I am. It's interesting because with the Love Proof, I feel like the love was so singular that now I'm exploring relationships that are, it made it less complicated in a way. And now these relationships are massively complicated, and the plots are much, much, much more intricate. So,
okay. Well, that's exciting. I can't wait to
yeah,
hear when those come out.
Thanks.
I would love to open this up to anybody who's here. If you have questions, comments, would love to hear what you have to say. Don't be
shy. And I'm happy to talk about writing in general, or any of my background. Happy to discuss.
Here, I will switch this to gallery view. Does anybody have any questions? Barbara, please jump in.
More comment. Jake obviously had sex since he managed to get a child, but it didn't seem like he ever fell in love either. He definitely did not seem to love the mother of his son.
Yeah.
For sure. So he also just threw himself into his work. And while that seems incredibly unrealistic to me, on the other hand, I know quite a few stories in my own family of people who were married and then the spouse dies
Mm.
and they end up with the girl they dated when they were 15 years old. I mean, this is a very, very common thing.
Yeah.
When your spouse dies, you go back to somebody,
Right.
you don't just want to start over again. You go back to somebody you already knew that there's already some sort of shared history there.
Mm.
So that part of it struck me as kind of the finding each other 30 years later and still wanting to be together 30 years later. That actually seems super realistic to me.
Yeah.
The idea of never dating anybody and falling in love in those 30 years.
Yeah.
That was not realistic, but ending up together, I thought was super realistic.
Right.
That didn't faze me in the slightest. My dad dated when my mom died, not during. Their best friends couple, the husband of one couple died. My mother died. They ended up together. My cousin's dad ended up with his girlfriends he dated at 15. I think that's something that happens a lot.
I know stories like that as well.
Yeah.
I ended up with the high school sweetheart.
Exactly. But maybe there was somebody in between. But,
Yeah.
often ends up with somebody they already knew. So,
Absolutely.
and there's something about that first love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I don't control covers. I have say in covers, but I don't control them. And when I got a copy of the cover to approve, it came with this line, "Why does first love stay with us?" And I remember thinking, I didn't come up with that, but I remember considering it, thinking, okay, interesting. And that's what's been really resonating with people, is that it is a real thing. Like, first love stays with us.
Did you write Sophie to look like you?
No, but thank you. No, I did not. And I don't, it takes a lot of work to be fake blonde. So she's a real blonde. So yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? Hi, Laurel, jump right in.
Hi, sorry, I'm kind of in the dark. I found your premise to be really wonderful because from the story, I took this, like, I want to believe that whether I see the people or not, old loves, we're connected.
Yeah.
It's almost irrelevant to me whether I ever see them again, but the fact that there's still that connection is kind of a wonderful. The book kind of made me think about that and think that's really nice. I like that. I want to believe that the person I was in love with when I was 15, who I've never stopped thinking about in spite of great happiness and a nice life, a life I appreciate, that it's still there, that connection. So your book kind of it was very hopeful. I don't know. I'm not like looking for hope, but it was just a very nice thing to be thinking about. So thank you.
Oh, I very much appreciate that opinion. And that is what I also hope to believe in myself. And it's been very nice. So I've done a lot of book club events for this book, and it's not only hopeful for people who don't need hope, but it can be hopeful for people who are dealing with loss. So I've seen that in book clubs, people saying, wow, this really, this is what I'm feeling in the wake of this loss, or this is helpful to me in that situation. So when you need hope and when you don't, it's a nice idea.
Yeah, I like that too, because I think I wouldn't want to be with my first love, but I've always learned something from them.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference.
Right. I got a very long email, which was discussing, and I read everything that comes to me. I'm like a very involved author. And so I got one email which was saying, I don't believe that, first love is our best love. First love sets us up for our best love. And so someone felt very passionately about that, which I found very interesting.
I think it's one of those topics that people have a very strong opinions about.
Yes, indeed.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go.
I have a question here from Jody saying, really interesting discussion. Madeleine, would you change anything about the love proof? Maybe make Sophie more angry when Jake broke up with her, or any part of the plot?
No, I wouldn't. Easy.
Awesome.
It's a very tender book, and I love that about this book.
Yeah. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments or?
And if anything occurs to you after, I'm very active on Instagram at Madeleine Henry Yoga, and other social media.
Oh, I also have, I put it in the chat. I also have a link at Bronx River Books. If anybody would like to buy a signed copy of the book, there is a page right here. And they are offering a 10% discount to anybody who would like to buy a signed copy. So I urge you to go purchase a copy and, you know, have it for yourself. I may do that myself. And if that's it for everybody's comments or questions or any of that, I would like to, again, just thank you, Madeleine. This has been so great. It's been so nice chatting with you. And it's such a rare treat to have this kind of an in-depth discussion with somebody whose book you just read. So
well, thank you very much, Katie. And I really loved your questions and I really enjoyed our time. And thank you to everyone who showed up. I really appreciate it. I know there are a million books, so thank you for reading one of mine.
Hey, I have some influence and can push them to people. So
amazing.
Mary here says, I love historical fiction, but this was a new spin, a request for more physics or science mix.
Oh.
And Catherine said, thank you. I love the book and the discussion. So
amazing. Well, thank you everyone for your time. And I hope you have a great night. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much, Madeleine. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.